What does a typical day in your life would look?
Yeah,
Typical working day.
yeah. Uh, so before the whole virus situation, I had a very nice workflow, um, where I usually wake up about 6:30, and then I start my day, like like usual stuff, breakfast, so on, and then I get to work straight away. Um, it all depends on what needs to be done, but I juggle the priorities. There is one thing that I would call switching penalty. So if you need to switch focus from one project to another, or basically from a bit less, but from one programming language to another, there's a bit of penalty on your productivity. And it's
Okay.
especially, I see it when I have, for example, two clients working for at the same time, and then I switch from one project to another. It takes a bit of time for your mind to adjust that, okay, this is this project and these things are relevant for this project. So I try to switch the projects, like switch between projects as little as possible. So I wouldn't work half an hour on one project then switch to the other, because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Well, at least it's not working for me.
Mhm.
Um,
And how many
and then
projects do you take up at one time?
I try to have less than three.
Mhm.
Uh, Ideally, two. I think two is an ideal number. Two projects that are active.
Okay.
Um, but sometimes you have those ad hoc projects that just are really quick, or customer has basically 1 hour job for you to do, and then I would do them. I had weeks where I did work on 5 projects in a week, but for a couple of them it was just 1 hour, so it's not that big of a deal.
That also includes consultancy projects probably.
Yeah, like all the stuff that I'm doing.
Mhm.
um, and one thing that I'm trying to make sure is that in my day that I get, of course, all the food that I need. So I would never skip lunch. It must happen.
Yeah.
um, so no matter how busy I am, like me, like I consider myself more important than any projects that I'm doing, because I'm the like my health and my safety, and like everything about me is the what I offer to clients. So I need to make sure that I'm in the best shape. um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not in the best shape right now, but yeah.
I mean, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and also, so related to that, before the COVID, I would have the rule that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 4 o'clock I would be at the gym for at least 1 hour, and I practiced that for about 2 years before the virus happened, and this was, I think, this was one of the best decision I well, best decision, or best thoughts about my freelancing or consulting career, that I would just do that and set this time as a time for myself, because then even if there is something urgent going on, I can say, okay, this will happen, but it can happen later because it's my workout time. uh,
Okay.
of course, there were times when I skipped that, but it was maybe 2 or 3 times in the last 2 years,
Oh,
and it was because the project was very urgent. Like basically, someone would say that, okay, we really need to have this done by Sunday, and then I would just do that. But other than that, I would follow this rule. I would be, yeah, I would try not to miss these days.
so mostly you try to maintain a balance and not get too obsessed about a project that you compromise on your health and other areas. So I mean, that was also one of your primary motivations to switch to freelancing, because you wanted to have a balance. And with doing such an independent work, you can choose whether you want to live a balanced life, whether you want to, have lunch at the time that you want to do, or you can be flexible, but you still maintained a level of balance in all the different areas of your life, and you manage to do it consistently as well. So and I mean, in the long term, probably, uh, from a productivity standpoint also, you have to take care of yourself, so you can take care of the projects essentially.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Uh, and another thing that's really important is sleep. Like you should get a proper amount of sleep every night,
Yeah.
and I highly recommend it. It's very good for you.
How many hours do you sleep?
Um, I try to aim at 8 hours.
Okay, okay. Yeah, there's also controversy around this thing, right? How many hours does one need? I
Yeah.
mean, for me as well, I guess 8 hours would be ideal, but there are some people who can function normally on 6 hours, so they get
Mhm.
more time during the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's more individual. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now let's talk about skills in general, about all different kinds of work that you do. So talking about a freelance engineer in robotics space, you definitely need more skills than just the technical skills. So what are the you know core 5 or 6 skills that you would have to learn if you have to be a good freelancer, and that you have to brush up or practice on a regular basis?
Mhm. Uh, well, so first, like you mentioned, technical skills is basically what your main offering to the customer, even if you are a consultant, because your technical skills drive what you deliver.
Yeah.
So this needs to be this is yeah, I would say this needs to be very high on your list. The second one would be communication, of course, because you need to be able to communicate your ideas well with the team and with your customers. Um, and also, as part of communication, you could say that sales is also part of this. Uh, maybe not, maybe not. We could say that sales is a separate thing that you should be mindful of,
Hmm.
because you need to sell your services, you need to sell you as a person. So it's good to have some ideas about that. It's good if you know how to talk to people. Like for me, I struggle with that quite a bit because I'm an introvert, like really introvert that I can behave like extrovert at times, but situation needs to call for it. I'm most comfortable on my own normally,
Yeah.
um, but it's also part of communication that whatever is your preference, you should be able to communicate, ideally with a large amount of people if needed, and it shouldn't bring you down in any way. Uh, it will probably make you tired if you are introvert, but you should be able to pull this off. Um, and I think it's also a very soft skill, but not sure even if it's a skill, but for me curiosity is very important,
Okay.
because if you are curious, you will want to know how things work on a very um, technical level. Like you will want to know almost everything about the system, how it works,
Yeah.
and having this sort of the maps in your head of how things work also help you in the future, because you build this understanding of all the things that that are used in the solution that you are developing, and then you know what to expect from certain things. For example, we can think about sensors in this way or actuators, and having a deep understanding of that, of course, helps you deliver more value to the customer because you know what you are interfacing with and you know uh, what to expect from that.
Do you exercise your uh, curiosity? Do you, or are you naturally curious? You keep on questioning something and then you dig deeper into it. You Google more and search more resources, or do you have a practice where you sit down and ask questions every single day, or
Mm.
how do you practice it? Or
No, I don't really practice it. It's an interesting thought though, but I quite often go. So, for example, like it comes up a lot when I do weekly robotics. So I will find some robot platforms. The latest example is this stretch from Hello Robot. So the robot with this Cartesian system that I've
yeah.
mentioned.
Mhm.
So I've noticed that they have open source repositories. So I've started looking through the code, seeing how they implemented things, and I think you could say this is part of this, like this drive to explore things and see how things are made by how other people do things and so on. Um,
Also,
and I
you'll
think
get yeah, continue please.
yeah, I think I basically finished. I didn't don't know what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, what I was saying is that also you get lots of ideas when you're constantly curious and search more things and compile all these things. So you feed your mind with these things and then you also can generate more ideas for your work. So is your work more uh, on the creative side or on the analytical side or a mixture of both? Probably a mixture of both, right?
Yeah, I would say probably more analytical, really. In the work I actually get paid to do. Of course, it would depend on the project, customer, and so on. But usually, it's writing the code or interfacing the systems together. So this is something where you don't have too much room for interpretation because this is how the sensor works and this is the data stream that you get and this is how you need to handle this, right?
Yeah.
So there are not many creative way you can do stuff here, and if you do if you do need to get creative, it's probably something is not right because there should be the simplest way for you to interface the system, and simplest in my experience so far is the best.
Yeah.
Because if you try to do some workarounds and so on, it's then you need to support this code in some way, and it's not that easy. Well,
And you
of
also
course,
have deadlines, so you have
yeah,
to
you have
deliver
deadlines
things
as
on
well.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So it's more on the analytical side of things.
Yeah, I would say so. Like creative, maybe if I have some customers saying to me that they want to build a robot that will do this and this tasks, and how could we approach this? Then
Hmm.
it gets a bit more creative, but again, we are talking robots, so you will have sensors, you will have actuators, and
Yeah.
there is not so much you can, get creative. Not so much room for creativity.
Yeah, there's like a fundamental set of principles that you have to follow. Yeah, you have the sensors, actuators, and you have to have interface between that. So that I mean, also you could be creative as well, but probably over the past several years there have been uh, so a set of standards might have been established which you have to follow, which will make your work simpler. So it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel or think of your own ideas when already the other people might have done in the past.
Well, I think it's like we could say that there's a creativity in the implementation. So that's the thing you are talking about here, and that's certainly, well, probably not a place where you can put too much creativity. But I think there is very interesting things can come up on a much higher level. So, for example, if you wanted to interface your robot with a voice assistant, right, and do like bring all of these new technologies together, and there you can have a quite bit of creativity going on. So, how you can put together the systems that already exist to do something novel and really
Yeah.
curious. So I think in robotics currently, at least the kind of robotics that I do here is that's the point where the most creativity comes into effect.
Yeah. When also when you are probably taking uh, projects that require you to think from scratch. Maybe you are just given a statement that we need a robot like this, and hardware, and the robot needs to do this particular set of
Mhm.
activities, and then probably you need to be more creative. But generally speaking, do you get more projects where you have to think uh, from scratch how to do these things, or a particular portion of a project that you have to do it? And if it's like one particular aspect of the pipeline of the robot, then you probably need to just follow the way things are to be done, I mean, in the analytical sense.
Yeah, so usually it would be like this part of the system customers wants me to look at. So for example, like tuning the navigation or setting up navigation or localization on the robot. So this is like this kind of work is the work that I get most often.
Yeah.
Uh, but every now and then you get a project where, okay, we are starting from scratch. We want to develop this robot that will have this kind of functionality. How do we go about this? Um, and then I'm in this flow of looking into actuators, sensors, and basically conceptually to put this robot together.
Yeah.
And then the customer can decide if this meets their requirements, and then he will go with that. So basically, this is where I finish my consulting job. And then they might realize that, okay, we would like to hire you as a developer on the team, or someone. So this is where I come as a contractor. So
Okay.
basically, I switch hats, right? So yeah, so work on the implementation side of things. But it really all depends on the customer and what they need to do.
And what are the typical skills? Now, I mean, you told about the soft skills that you require. What are the typical skills, the technical skills that you would require? So you would require ROS, and you would need to know a few specific programming languages. Also, which is the programming language that you work on more often? Which one is more in demand for robotics? And do you use other frameworks as robot frameworks apart from ROS? So, like the tools and the skill set that you
Mhm.
use on a regular basis.
Yeah. So I work mostly with ROS, so this will be more ROS oriented answer. But programming languages wise, definitely you need to know C++ on some level because lots
Okay.
of drivers are written in C++. Uh, there is some functionality in ROS that only works with C++. For example, you have something called nodelets in ROS. So basically, to put it simple, normally in ROS, when you exchange messages, the message is serialized. So you have some object, it's serialized, it's sent over to another node that takes this information and does some work. But you can have nodes, which I believe is a shared pointer. So this node writes to some object, and this node can pick this object straight away. And
Hmm.
this way you don't have this overhead of serializing the messages. And there some other things that you can do only in C++. So I would say C++ is really required if you want to be advanced ROS user. Python, is basically I love Python in ROS because it's so simple. It's uh, you can prototype really quickly, test stuff quickly, and if I have a choice, I would use Python. But of course, it will depend on the requirements of the system and on the node that I'm developing. If it's nothing really critical, I would go for Python because it would take me 5 minutes and not 2 hours, right? Uh,
Yeah.
but it all really depends. Um, Another thing that I do is I do a bit of work with drones every now and then. So with drones, there is you have those autopilots called Pixox. So this is an open source autopilot, and there you have basically two flight stacks. One is called PX4, and the second one is called ArduPilot. So every now and then I work on these two. If the customer needs some integration, checking the flight logs and so on. Uh, but if you need to develop any drivers on them, you would need to use C++.
Okay.
So
So
yeah.
both are equally important, but you prefer Python because of its simplicity and ease of operation.
Uh, yeah, but it all depends on what needs to be done and how fast it needs to be. Like
Yeah.
if you just need to pass one message to a certain node and you don't care how fast it's processed and so on, it's Python is usually good enough.
Hmm.
But if you needed to go for real-time operation, then you probably would need to look into C++.
Okay. So
And yeah.
apart from these programming languages and ROS as a standard tool, is there any other company specific framework or tool that you use that you probably would not be familiar with, but you'd have to spend some time to get familiar with, or the tools are not the what the company cares at all, and you are free to choose your own
Mhm.
tools?
Uh, so as usual, it will depend on the company because they might have some
Yeah.
requirements that they might have no requirements, just want a working prototype.
Hmm.
Um, but some other tools that's worth checking out, I think, is the low-level programming. So if you just writing some embedded code, and if you are looking into embedded code, I would recommend checking out some real-time operating systems. Like we have free RTOS or NATEX operating systems, and they
Okay.
are used quite a lot in the industry. And it's definitely something worth looking into, especially if you work on robots that needs to be ideally real-time. Um, so, for example, if you use a mobile robot with wheels, it usually doesn't need real-time operation.
Hmm.
It's fine with the normal Linux operating system without any kernel patches. But if you are looking into a robot, balancing robot, for example, or I would imagine humanoid or quadruped robots, then you would probably need stuff like that. So it's useful to look a bit, at least a bit, into real-time operating system. Um, but as usual, it depends on the things you want to work on and the specific requirements.
Okay. And which was the so you've worked on how many projects have you worked on till now as a freelancer? Roughly, I mean.
Probably over 20 projects. Uh, I would need to pick up the list, but it was, I'm pretty sure it was, I built over 20 companies already, I think.
Okay.
Maybe even more. But I don't want to give you like false numbers here.
Okay, okay. And what was the most interesting project that you took?
I think the conceptually the most interesting is is this modular robot that I told you about before.
Hmm.
But also one project that I really liked was there's a company making autonomous lawn mowers. So
Oh,
this is interesting. This is very interesting, and it's they are also quite active in Ross Agriculture Slack. So they are called Greensy, and it's amazing. Their progress over the last year or two is amazing. Like you should check out their Twitter channel. It's they have some cool stuff going on.
oh, nice.
Um,
I'll check it out. It's interesting. I mean, for things like vacuum cleaning a house, or even the agricultural robots or lawn mowing, you don't really need people, right? The person is mostly wasting his time moving the robot, moving the machine around, and if you can make it autonomous, then it's way more efficient,
mhm,
saves a lot of time.
yeah, yeah. There's another very interesting project I work on, but this was even before I was a freelancer. But I think it's useful to mention. It's well, useful. Well, I just like this project. So I was working for a company making autopilots for drones,
Okay.
and I was working on a project where basically we wanted to make a helicopter uh, be controllable like a car. So if you like flying helicopter is very difficult because you need to move a couple of things at the same time.
Hmm.
So you have a lever that moves up and down, and then you also twist it to adjust some things, and also you have the pedals to go left, right, and it's really demanding. Um, and of course you have the stick. Uh, but
Yeah.
we did the project where we basically made a kind of interface to the autopilot that allowed you to specify your own rules how the system who should behave on the input. And as the output of this, we had basically a prototype where you were able to control the helicopter like a car. So you would have a steering wheel, you would have pedals,
Oh,
and then this was enough for you to have a very precise control of a helicopter. So this was very interesting project, and yeah, it's been yeah. I think this was one of the most interesting projects I worked on.
okay. And what was the? How long did it take you to finish that one?
Um, I think this took about half a year, maybe 10 months. But this is because we had already an existing autopilot. So the autopilot was working well, and it was like a couple of years of effort of getting this autopilot to work. And then just this interface was the added value here, and this was pretty cool.
Yeah. So what is actually more difficult to realize or build, an autonomous drone or aerial vehicle, or autonomous mobile robot, a wheeled robot, an AGV,
Yeah, it
or it doesn't
really.
really matter? I don't know. What
Mhm.
do you say?
Um, I think probably a drone is easier in some way because the sensing is easier. Assuming you had sensors all around your multi-rotor or a drone, uh, you just need to make sure you don't collide with stuff. I don't know. It sounds simple, right? Um, but you have lots of maneuvering possibilities, like up, down, left, right, follow trajectory,
Yeah,
and so on.
yeah,
With mobile robot, it's a much more difficult because if you have some terrain that you need to traverse, you need to make sure that you can actually go this direction because it's not so steep or there are not no holes in there, right? So this is quite difficult, I would say. But also it depends on the scenario. Like if you assume that the robot is deployed on the road, for example, then you don't have this issue with traversing and so on. But I still would say that the drones will be easier because you don't have to handle so much the risk of collision with people hurting someone and so on.
Yeah, yeah,
Of course, you wouldn't want to fly them in spaces like around cities and so on. Uh, and by the way, like when it comes to autonomous drones, I don't know if you've heard of Skydio,
yeah.
autonomous drone.
No.
So it's a drone that has couple of cameras. I think more than four, but I don't know the exact number. But they seem to have figured out the autonomous navigation and following people at least. So they started as a sort of selfie camera drone. So you just pick the person on the screen, and the drone will follow this person. And if you check out their YouTube, some of their YouTube videos, you will see that it manages well even in the forest because the company made really good
That's quite cool.
SLAM solutions, obstacle avoidance.
Yeah.
And and recently, this company started branching out into more from consumer to B2B solutions.
Hmm.
So they made a demo where this robot scans a bridge autonomously. So it flies around, avoids all the obstacles, and so on. So this is pretty cool. I'm really looking forward to see what they come up with, and I really hope they have an API at some point so I can play with that.
And you also have lots of drones in your background, so you also probably play around with drones apart from your work. Any interesting side projects?
Yeah, well, those drones are actually not mine. So my girlfriend flies drones. She flies so these are some racing drones. So you can check out her channel. It's called Blue Owl FPV. I'll send you a link
Oh,
later on.
okay. Yeah, yeah. I read
But
in the description.
this is some proper racing drones. Like you fly at about this angle, and it's crazy what she does. I
Wow.
cannot fly drones half as good. Like I manage not to crash, uh, but she's much better than me in that.
Yeah.
Um,
You need a license to fly a drone, right?
uh, it depends on the country. For recreation, you don't usually.
Up to a
But again,
certain size.
yeah, up to a certain size, but this will differ between countries. But
Okay.
if you want to do it for professionally, you usually need a license, at least in the countries I know of.
Hmm. Interesting. That's a nice hobby as well. Sounds
Yeah.
very fun. Yeah. So now let's talk about learning and education, because you told that you self-taught yourself a lot of things as you became a freelancer. Did you learn ROS on your own?
Yeah, I've learned it on my own as well.
Okay, we can also talk about what resources you used, how you taught yourself ROS. But generally, what are the things that one should focus on learning? I know the primary would be programming, but for someone who is starting out, what is the primary thing that he should focus on, and then after that, what should he learn? What should his private curriculum look like if we can design it in a way?
Mhm. So this is actually uh, pretty difficult because uh, as I said earlier, I was taking university classes, so
Yeah.
they took us through the whole curriculum. And because I was studying mechatronics on my first year, I was learning chemistry. like chemistry, like material science, all this kind of stuff, like mechanics, electronics, and so on.
Mhm.
Um, so the most difficult thing for me, if I had to learn from scratch, like knowing what I know about the stuff that I'm doing, would be finding the resources. Because if you want to do robotics, you need to have at least some idea about the mechanics, electronics, control systems, and programming. So I think those are the core four things that you need to have some idea about. Not necessarily, you have to learn it on the master's students level, but
Okay.
at least you should have some intuition about things like that. Um, So I wouldn't be able to point you to some specific things to look at, but I would focus on those four things. Uh, or alternatively, I would recommend checking out some Arduino projects and starting to work on things. Basically, a very hands-on approach, because you will find heaps of tutorials on Arduino motor control, so you could follow these step by step,
Mhm.
and then you would be probably wanting to extend that or see that, for example, you could follow some tutorial to build an Arduino four-wheel robots, let's say. And then I imagine you could ask yourself a question, okay, what would it take for me to use different motors, right? And this can lead you to learning about different kind of motors that you have and how they work underneath it. And then from that, you sort of start looking into, okay, I need to have more control on these motors. So I start looking into encoders. And
Yeah.
then you have a motor, you have an encoder, and okay, maybe you will come up with yeah, you will see something going on about PID control, and then you start looking into that and working with that. But I think that, like, for me, it's very easy to say that because I I know that all these things come together, but
Yeah.
I don't know how it is for the person who doesn't have all the knowledge that I have, obviously.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's true.
so, but I imagine if you start with some tutorials that you understand and you follow through, then at some point you will be able to ask questions. And if you find a place where you can get the answers to these questions, then this would help a lot with self learning. Um, so I think Reddit is a good place for stuff like that, because some of the communities there are really helpful. Um, in terms of software development, so this is way easier because you just
Yeah.
you could just do software. Uh, you will find plenty of books on software. Yeah, so I would well, the way I usually do that was to follow a book, like read the book cover to cover,
Mhm.
and then look for another book or try to apply what I've learned in some personal projects. Um, so I think this would be, yeah, programming is way easier than all the everything about robotics coming together.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's definitely it's possible. Like everything is possible if you are motivated enough and you start looking into this.
Do you think one can learn robotics without a formal education? Because it's a lot of things that you have to cover, and
Uh,
you probably have all the resources online, but you won't have the structure and the guidance required. Do you think it's
mhm.
possible to
Yeah.
learn on your own and become a freelancer or even get a job without any formal education?
So I definitely think it's possible. I think lots of companies care about what you know and what you can actually do than the education that you get.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but the thing is, like, if you are starting out, you don't know what you need to learn.
Yeah.
So this is the main difficulty with robotics. So this is where university helps a lot. Um, but if I didn't know anything about robotics um, and I needed to learn it on my own or wanted to learn it on my own properly, I would probably start looking into the robotics curriculum on university, because I don't know
Okay.
how it is in the rest of the world, but in Poland we had all the classes described, all the modules that you would take when you joined robotics robotics course. So this would be, I think, would be a good starting point, because at least it gives you a high level topics that you would need to cover to get the knowledge you want. Um, Alternative is what I said with the Arduino, for example, and doing projects on your own. But I think the key thing that universities give you is access to hardware.
Yeah.
Uh, because if you need a robot arm, like a proper robot arm, it would cost about probably at least $7,000 for some cobot arm. For any higher than for any bigger arm, it will be probably tens of thousands. So on if you are on a home budget, it's not really feasible.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very good things about university, because you get to work on these things with people that know some things about these systems. So for me, this would be the biggest advantage of going to university for robotics.
Okay. And you also mentioned that for someone who is starting out, he should focus on building small projects using Arduino, and then, swap the motors to understand different things and build up upon that. And this is like a different approach to learning robotics than, for example, uh, taking courses online or even at a university. Then you learn a lot of theory, and then maybe you take up a project at the end to apply some portions of it. Which of the two ways of learning is better for robotics? Because in university probably you'll be spending most of your time learning the theoretical uh, aspects and concepts which are really important, but at the same time, if you are doing it on your own, you are probably also quickly experimenting the things, maybe with the Arduino, and then look up online to only get the information that is required.
Mhm. I think the ideal solution would be actually both approaches at the same time,
Okay.
because then you have the best of the two worlds, right? Uh, you need to be mindful of is, if you look up some tutorial, I don't know, on instructables with some motor control,
Hmm.
for example, they won't touch too much on theory, most likely.
Yeah.
So there is a chance that if in your discovery work, because this is quite a bit of discovery work that you need to do to find all the things that relate to that,
Hmm.
you might miss some things that are quite obvious if you are on the university, because that's the first thing that you are learning. So I think you might go through all of, like, many projects, build robots, and don't realize that certain stuff is even exists in robotics. I cannot think of an example straight away, but you probably get what I mean.
Yeah, I get
Um,
what you're saying.
yeah, but on the other hand, like, I think the most important thing is your drive to learn. Because even if you didn't have this formal education, but you, for example, bought this Pixel drone, pixel based, so basically autopilot for a drone. And you started experimenting with that. You built your own quadrocopter, you put the autopilot on it, you started flying it, learning how it flies, why it flies the way it does, and then integrated your own sensors. You would learn quite a lot. So maybe you wouldn't learn everything about robotics,
Yeah.
but in this niche field, you could become quite an expert, especially on these autopilots. And already this can be very attractive to some of the companies, right? Because they do projects that relate to this autopilot. If you know how to create software for it, then that's all they need, right? So it can be very, this can be one of the ways. Um, but the problem is not a problem really, but a consideration here is that should you learn really a broad scope of things and then narrow it down, or should you start in this narrow down thing? So you are making a bet basically on this narrow field and hope that this gives you something in life. Uh, Hopefully, well, you treat it as a hobby, so it's not a winning or losing game because you enjoy it and you are learning and you don't expect anything from it.
Yeah.
So this is a perfect place to be. Or you could take this approach like your broad knowledge is what you get from the university, and your work on this autopilot is what you do in your spare time, and you are going really in depth in this direction. So this is sort of what I did really with my university classes, touching on all the things, and I'm me focusing on robots, on drones.
Okay. Yeah, in robotics, it can be a really difficult question which area to focus on, because robotics is like really
Yeah.
vast. You can consider autonomous driving, or uh, pick and place robots, or the vacuum cleaning ones, autonomous robots, and different kinds of things.
Mhm.
So obviously the natural tendency would be to learn all of it, but it's not really possible. So also from an industrial point of view, people would be looking for an expert in one particular area, for example, like you mentioned, autopilot.
Mhm.
But at the same time, if you get a broad skill set, maybe being an expert in one area but having an overall knowledge about the others, then it would also be a good long term. Maybe this particular area is does not have that many job opportunities or
Mhm.
freelance work, then you can switch to other one and explore more.
Yeah, and also like you can, if you, it depends on your goals. If you just want to do, if you want to do robotics, like robotics is so broad, you could be doing just mechanics for robotics.
Yeah.
So you can focus on mechanics because that's what interests you, and then I'm sure you will have plenty of jobs to do. You don't need to cover everything. Don't need to learn about electronics of software if that's not interesting for you, because mechanics might be the one thing that you want to focus on, and it's perfectly fine. It's um, yeah, but yeah, it all depends on you what you want to do.
Yeah, so it's more of a personal choice. Which area do you want to be great at, or do you want to have like two or three areas that you would target essentially?
Mm, yeah.
All right, hope you got a lot of information, a lot of useful information from this particular portion of the talk. This was part 2.2 professional of the conversation with Mateusz Sadowski. In this talk, we talked in more depth about the different projects that he has done, how you can be learning robotics on your own. Is it even possible to build your own robotics curriculum and start learning from scratch? And a lot of other interesting things related to freelancing, but also related in a more general sense to robotics. If you enjoy it, consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon so that you get notified on time whenever the next podcast, the next episode is live. Also, if you're someone who would prefer to listen to the podcast rather than watch the full length videos, I upload the entire podcasts in audio format on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify and Google Podcasts. So feel free to check out the Building Culture podcast on your favorite podcast platform. But the talk with Matt is not over yet. In the last part of the conversation, part 3, inspirational of the talk with Mateusz Sadowski, we dig a bit deeper into the inner workings of his mind. Sounds a bit too intense, but essentially, what we are trying to do is understand what actually inspires him towards robotics, what is his way of thinking, and a bit towards the motivation aspect of things in general.